All right, call the regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell.
Here.
Mrs. Duncan.
Here.
Mr. Gibson.
Here.
Mr. Morton.
Here.
Mr. Sewell.
Here. And if you stand, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first order of business will be our superintendent's report.
Okay, I'm going to, 1 second, putting out a thing in our chat to remind people that if they have a question to post it. And then when we get to the public participation portion of our agenda, then whatever chat questions are in there, we can take a moment to review appropriately. Okay. So as normal, just want to update you on a few items relative to things that have developed over the last few weeks. Our bleachers in the high school gym are 50% done. Our home section is complete. Our maintenance department, along with some custodians, are chipping in. We've stripped all the bleachers out. We've got scrubbers out and cleaned the laminate plywood that access the surface, so we really cleaned those up. We spray painted some steps and power washed them, got the new seats installed. Now, if you were to walk into our gym, we have the visitors' bleachers out. They've been completely stripped, and we're ready to begin. What we found out is we're about 20 end seats short. So Mr. Cimento has been in contact with Farnham, the company we ordered them through. They've shipped those, and then we'll work on the balance billing and whatever we've got to do on the back end of that. We don't know why that happened based on their estimate, but they are on order. That will not stop us from doing the work, but it will slow us down if we start too early and we get stopped because we haven't received those. So you have to do starters at one end, and then you run those rows all the way to the other wall. So they turned out really, really nice. And remember, the full quote for product and installation was $64,000. We paid $34,000 for the bleacher seats or the gym seating, but our own maintenance department is installing it, so we're saving $30,000 in quoted labor. Obviously, we're spending our own labor to do it, but we're at a little advantageous period, being that our custodians got a jump start on the room cleaning and so forth back in May. As far as basket is concerned, I don't know if you got a chance to pop in there during the day. Carpet is in, the tile is in. We need to, once the traffic has died down, we'll take a couple days, and the areas that is the commercial vinyl tile there, the VCT, we will seal it and wax it. But all the flooring is in, the plumbing is partially installed, the toilet's been set, the sinks are in. We're working on the shower section for that small half-wash stall. Has some work yet to be done. The electrical is being finished. The ceiling fixtures are in, but we're working on finished wiring. So making a lot of progress. The cabinetry's in. It actually is taking shape and looking like a finished product. So obviously several other items to be completed. We have another construction meeting tomorrow with the architect and the construction manager from Murphy, and we'll be on a timetable understanding how fast we'll be done. We were supposed to be done by this Friday. There's a lot of work yet to happen this week, so we could be maybe 98% done. A few incidentals hanging out there. Would not be a surprise to have to go beyond the expected completion date. Sometimes that's normal, but we are on pace to, in the very near future, have the office moved back in, get the principal, secretary, and the clinic set up for operation, but definitely before the start of the school year, before staff gets here. Obviously, we're spending a lot of time this month lining up all of our facility and transportation needs to start the year. We've got buses are all stickered and ready for use. So we're ready to start the year from an inspection standpoint. We purchased our TransFinder routing software, the first time we've probably ever purchased routing software, but we will have to maintain 3 routes. We'll have our regular routes where we run 10 buses, as if we had every kid coming every day, and then we'll have to also maintain a Scarlet transportation schedule and also a gray transportation schedule. So there's a lot of complexity in routing that we are not going to be able to do in time on our own. And we might not be able to do it in time with TransFinder because we think they're ahead of schedule, but they said it usually is about a 3-week startup before you're fully operational. They have to map our district GPS-wise for accuracy on addresses and streets, and that can be a little time consuming. So that process was initiated last week, and then they get our data through our student information system, and then they start to work with loading the data and pinpointing that data to our transportation needs. So a lot of technical detail needs to be ironed out between now and the start of school, and we'd love to be able to have those routes established, the week of the 24th so that we can release them. It might be tight, so we're prepared to possibly do it on our own by hand, but it won't be without a lot of bumps in the road. But we'll see if we can get that done. And as far as students are concerned, our summer meals program, that ended on last Thursday. We just weren't getting the level of participation. We also were not getting the ability to staff it appropriately. And so as our cafeteria operation is trying to turn its attention to next school year and how we're going to have to adapt and adjust, we wanted to put an end to the summer meals. We were serving anywhere from 37 pickup to 45 pickup meals a day. It varied, so we were able to put an end to that and then turn our attention fully to the school year. All of you had a copy of our restart plan that was posted to our website. Have spent a lot of time fielding individual email questions. There's been a lot of parent questions with regards to virtual learning. That's where a bulk of our energies have been spent over the last 10 days, trying to roll out our virtual learning registration form. We have finalized those registrations. We have well over 100 students that have been signed up by parents to commit to a semester of learning in our virtual learning platform. The virtual learning platform is going to be provided through an online software from Fuel Education. In short name, it's called Fuel Ed. We partner with the ESC. They typically, for the TVLA, which is the Trumbull Virtual Learning Academy, the ESC has always been our screener. Their tech people have always gone through the various software options, and we've had to adjust as they've recommended adjustments. We used to be on Play-Doh for our credit recovery. Then when we made the switch to Fuel Ed, we do Fuel Ed for credit recovery. Now, credit recovery looks very different than Fuel Ed's full curriculum program. The Fuel Ed credit recovery program, you actually deny access to part of the curriculum because the kid has already spent the seat time with a teacher. Under the old summer school method, there used to be hours of instruction that you got sitting in the classroom for 180 days a year. And then the state had guidelines on how many hours were needed if you were making up a class due to failure or in need of credit recovery. And they were significantly less hours than all the hours needed for that seat time. So the same concept is true for Fuel Ed's credit recovery. So when we operate our credit recovery, we shut off parts to the curriculum because it's not the initial exposure that students are getting to the curriculum. So under the full curriculum platform, it's much more robust, much more challenging, much more standards-based because it is considered the initial exposure that students will get. So the ESC is our partner. Through them, we're able to contract with Fuel Ed for site licenses, and we will either run it through the ESC or we will purchase those site licenses and try to conduct it ourselves. So there's some things that we're working on, and we'll go into executive session and after the conclusion of the meeting or at the end of the meeting to discuss about some negotiating things and with our union regarding possibly how that fuel ed program ran at LaBrae might look. So currently, the virtual learning program, we are going to spend the next several days getting that up and running for those families that had committed to it. As far as the parent questions in the area of protocols, we are looking at a lot of questions with regards to safety protocols. Transportation was one of them, possibly a couple issues with transportation where parents are questioning, well, how can you have social distancing, but on a bus you're saying 2 to seat? And so what I've told those parents who have emailed me is that, well, number one, it's important for everybody to understand that, the health department has said, busing is what it is. It's not the same as a classroom setting where they recognize social or physical distancing is much easier to accomplish. And the State Department of Health recognizes that with transportation, you might have a different set of circumstances. So in our situation, it is impossible to double route. It's impossible to set up additional runs because of the logistics of the number of buses we have, the lack of available drivers. We're all on a boat that if we try to run double the routes or add more routes to our transportation, we can't find drivers under normal circumstances, let alone now when everybody's in the same boat, potentially looking for hiring additional drivers. So it's impractical and literally not feasible to hire additional drivers and to run more routes. So, early on, we had told our community that we're going to take our cue from public transportation and require masks on buses. And we were telling that to our parents back in late June. So we're going to take that route. But we've also asked our parents to opt out of transportation. So through our surveys, we've indicated to them, are you willing and able to take your child off of our bus? And there have been a number of parents that have said they can and they will. So what our office will do now, we know who those parents are and we know who's opted out virtually because we don't need to transport them. We can now hone in and pinpoint the students that we can take off that bus. And so as I've indicated to some parents, by the time we implement those details, we think we will get down to 2 on a seat being the exception and not the norm, because we'll drastically be able to reduce the number of students riding our bus and inherently achieve greater physical distancing than if we were trying to transport, the same number of kids. So that is one area. Obviously, we are installing the hand sanitizers on the buses. Those are in. Students will get on the bus in the stairwell, get some hand sanitizer, and then they will, load the bus appropriately. We have shared via Facebook and pushed out via Twitter the safety video that the Trumbull ESC Public Relations Department made at the request of our Superintendents Association so that we can let families know what those protocols will look like. And that is currently on our YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to view that, they can. And then the last thing relative to students, and obviously if you got questions about things that I didn't bring up or things about the restart plan as it relates to academics and students and teaching and learning, we can surely answer those. But we're really not sure where the state's going to take us when it comes to interscholastic athletic competition. I'm sure you've heard the realm of they're going to require testing on all athletes and coaches before you can compete. You've heard rumors about no spectators at events. I know we've had some scrimmages scheduled for non-contact sports like volleyball, and we have told our coaches and student athletes that there will not be spectators for those scrimmages. Currently in contact sports like soccer and football, we're not allowed to scrimmage. You're only allowed intra-squad practices. So you've got the lieutenant governor saying, well, the testing was more for the interstate competitions in basketball and some of the things that were happening over the summer. That was not going to be meant for high school athletics, but that executive order through the director of health is still in place, so it still applies to us at the current moment. And then you've got major NCAA leagues that are gradually shutting down their fall sports. Some are shutting down football. So you've got a lot of speculation across the board as to what the current status is for interscholastic competition in the state of Ohio. So at this point, we're going to wait for a little bit of guidance on that, but it doesn't look good. The latest piece of factual evidence that I can give you is late last week, the Ohio High School Athletic Association did announce that the board of directors for OHSAA announced that they were shortening the football season to 6 contests and that the playoffs would start with every team in the state of Ohio making the playoffs. So in a nutshell, that's a paraphrased version of what they said, but we're not sure if even that is going to come to fruition. So we are all, I think, anxiously awaiting with bated breath, so to speak, because coaches, trainers, athletes, families, administrators, you name it, everybody kind of wants to know what the status of sports will be in Ohio. But it doesn't look very promising at this point, so we'll find out hopefully within the next 10 days or so. I think most people feel like the sooner the better. So at that point, if anybody has questions relative to our programs or students or athletics, relative to our restart, I'll gladly field them before we move on to other parts of the report to the board.
In the restart plan, the parents that opted out had to do it by August 7th, right?
That is correct.
And we don't even have whether our calendar is going to start on the 31st because we haven't made any changes there. So they had to make a commitment before we even tell them what our calendar is, and they have to be in it the entire semester.
Yes.
Even though 14 times it says in our, all plans are subject to change according to evolving circumstances, status of the pandemic, and recommendations and guidance by the health. Does that include them? The opting out? The opting out people?
No,
they have to stay in
the actual deadline for the opt-out, that was more of a hard, fast deadline of the 7th.
So we could change it all we want, but those parents have to stay in that opt-out.
The short answer to that is yes.
Is there a reason why? We're not helping our parents in that respect. We're
Sure.
helping ourselves, I know, but we're not helping our parents, because what if all of a sudden the pandemic is over and they said everybody can come back and they're stuck in virtual learning for a semester?
Well, I think your conjecture of a pandemic being over by August 31st is extremely hopeful, and I think it's a hope that we'd all like to enjoy, but probably not see in
Probably
reality.
not. But
And so when you're trying to talk about planning to start a school year, there's a lot of logistical things that have to be worked out. And with the virtual learning, if we are to make a commitment to purchasing seat licenses, once you make that commitment, there's no going back. So once we spend that money, unless we're really ready to throw that money away, and we're talking anywhere from $150,000 to maybe over $250,000, you at some point have to put in line some hard lines of determination and make tough choices, just like we're going to make tough choices throughout the school year. So that is one of those choices that, unless the board was willing to commit that expenditure and then back away from it without any chance to recoup those dollars, in my judgment, I didn't feel that was something that we could risk. So that's why on that particular deadline, I felt we needed to stick to that hard, fast deadline. Do you want to come back or do you not want to come back?
should
And
that
since
have
we
been
had a
brought to the
high
board?
percentage of parents in the survey suggesting they weren't comfortable sending their kids back, I felt that we could comfortably get them to commit early on.
Should that have been brought to the board rather than just made a hard, fast rule? I think it was Boardman and some of the others that early did it. They did it for the first 9 weeks, they committed.
You're going to
Not
see,
for a whole semester.
sure. I think you're going to see districts across the region doing things differently. There are a lot doing it by semester. There are a lot doing it by 9 weeks. One of the problems we run into with the seat licenses is once you've paid for it, if you're moving kids in and out on a 9-week basis, for example, there are some courses we might eliminate at the high school. You cannot easily integrate kids back into that high school schedule if there are 3 or 4 courses that get eliminated due to the number of opt-outs and low enrollment. So we felt it was best for long-term planning to set that semester deadline, because integration might not be as easy it might look easy on the surface, but it's not necessarily going to be easy to implement. because we're even looking at whether or not we even need a physics course because there's so few. Now, what happens if 2 kids who were enrolled in physics come back at the 9 weeks? Are we going to restart a physics course for 2 kids? Where do we put these kids on our schedule? Are we going to have something to be able to offer them at a 9-week juncture? That's easier to accomplish at a semester schedule because even in the curriculum within Dazzle, the way you slot your courses and the way you slot your course length, you don't typically do it on 9-week courses. You can do semester courses or you can do year-long courses. So if we had to make some kind of adjustment to our curricular offering, we could easily take a year-long physics course and convert it to a semester physics course. But it's much more difficult to do that on a 9-week basis. So, when it comes to online licenses, our own curricular offerings and what we're going to keep and what we're not going to keep, and the ability to move kids in and out, we just felt that 9 weeks was too short of a period and didn't offer a lot of opportunity for planning. I do know that one of our neighboring schools is going on 9 weeks plan, and they're spending money with the teachers to create their own online curriculum. And those teachers will run their own online curriculum, and that's where their online students will be. And then the teachers will also be responsible for their in-person curriculum. So they're doing it a little bit differently, and they've chosen to be able to let people come in and come out. And the way I understood it from their administration is they are phasing in deadlines for their teachers to produce that online curriculum. So that by the end of August, their online curriculum is for the first 9 weeks shall be posted already. And then there's another deadline for daily lessons that will be posted at a later date for the second 9 weeks. But for our planning purposes, we had consensus that a semester deadline was more fitting for us, and that's why that decision was made.
Why couldn't we have done it the way the one you just suggested, that they're doing their own?
Well, I think one of the things I think the easiest thing to say is when you're collaborating, you tend to collaborate mostly with the people that you're working with. And so everybody's bouncing ideas off of everybody. You've got superintendents in meetings bouncing ideas off of people. I can tell you that the district I shared with you is in the minority. Not all districts are doing that. Not even a majority of districts are doing that. The consensus in the room was to go for a semester, to get a commitment for a semester. There are districts across the state. Like I said, it's going to be varied, and I think you can pick and choose if you do the research and say, hey, there's 35% of the districts in the Mahoning Valley doing it this way, or there's 65% doing it this way. That's, I think, easy to accomplish if you're going to go out and do the research. But I think when you're trusting the people that you've assembled a team with, and you have discussions about how do we move forward, and the consensus in the room is that we should do it this way, and here are the reasons why, that is generally how those decisions are built through consensus. And so to bring that back to a board is something we could do, but generally, those are kind of decisions that we've gotten comfortable with making as an administrative team, because a board's goal or role is to legislate and make policy, and an administration team's role is to manage that process and then bring back to you, those policies. And so I would encourage you, if you don't like the policy that our administrative team is promoting to the board, then as a board member, you are recommended to vote no, because that's your right. But we're doing the job that our board has hired us to do, which is to manage those nuances of preparing. And the more people you involve in that, so if we want to say, let's have the entire board in those decision makings, or let's start having collaborative sessions with other districts and take that input, we've got to be ready come August 31st. And I'm afraid that if we drag our feet too much, we're not prepared. And the last thing I want to do is see any ball drop because we took too much time because we were more worried about building consensus as opposed to trusting those people who have been empowered with those responsibilities to make judicial or prudent decisions to be prepared. So is it a tough decision? Yes. Is it a lengthy decision to commit to? Absolutely yes. Did our parents agonize over it? Many of them did. Many of them did not. They made it very quickly. A preponderance of them made it within the first few days. the first 3 days, we were up pushing 100, and now we're well over 100. So I know it's not an enviable position to be in. It's not one that I envy to be in, to force our parents to do it. But if we're to plan accordingly, then we have to have some line of demarcation in the sand for choices to be made. So, and I'll go back to why did we not come to the board on the August 31st? I had said at our last meeting, I had asked the board to see if anybody had an objection to the August 31st date. I heard no objection, either to me in email or verbally, so I felt comfortable with that decision to give our families a heads up that August 31st would be the new start day of school year. And so that's been publicized. I've told our community that it needs a final board ratification, but it's out there because when offered to the board gave me very little feedback that said we object, individually or collectively at the last meeting. So, that's how we arrive at those decisions, but it's all in the effort to make good judgments, to make sure that all the buses and trains are running on time, and that we're not dropping the ball come August 31st because, we didn't have the time to get X done, or we didn't have the time to get B done. And I think at this point, that's probably the best explanation and honest explanation that I can give.
Well, I'm thinking we could have started even earlier planning, been more proactive back in May as well, which would add 3 more weeks on since everything was shut down in May early. And I know we had one day of teacher training or something in that,
Yeah.
which we could have had 3 weeks of teacher training and started on.
Well, there's a lot more that goes into this than just teacher training.
Back in May, we had the president saying that we were going to be possibly done with this by the middle of the year, and many officials thinking we would by end of June too. So it kind of left.
Well, that's why I say proactive rather than reactive.
Well, I don't know that applies in this because we didn't really know it would be normal. We have to assume it's going to be normal. If they say it's going to be back to normal, if that's what they're advocating. But obviously, we're nowhere near normal, and in the future, we can see 6 months now we're not going to be either. My opinion.
One thing I see is, even the governor said that, the local boards will make the final decision. That's not completely accurate. We make a final decision on a minuscule amount of little things that go into it. We're governed by whatever he says, just like we're having the meeting tonight, right? Because we're not allowed mass gatherings, which he put into his proclamation about the face mask for all of Ohio. We didn't have any say over that. That's why we had to go back to the YouTube meeting rather than a public meeting. So we have a say, but it's not like we have control. We still got to go by the governors and the county health commission. Mahoning County is doing stuff different than we're doing. And I've had a lot of people ask me that. Why can't we do this? Well, Mahoning County is different, in trouble. For some reason, he doesn't like certain things that we do. So even like Mr. Morton suggested, we can change our plan whenever. It's not that we want to change our plan, but if the government entities come in and say you have to, we will have to adjust. It's not really that we want to. We're going to have to take it. I think all of us would rather have our school completely open. We'd like to do certain things, have as many kids in the classroom. The county commission, the health commissioner won't allow us because it's 6 feet social distance. So there's, it's out there that says we have control. We have minor, very minor control. So we have to be able to adjust. And the plan that we have is the plan we want to try to use and implement. Will we have to adjust? Yeah, but I think more of it, the adjustment's going to be if the government comes in and says you have to adjust because of this. We're not going to make a random adjustment just for the sake of adjusting something. And to go by what the planning committee had to do, the administration, they had to take the numbers and logistics and plan out how many kids can I get in the class, how can I do the busing and stuff. So they had to start with a hard number. So the only way you do that is, like you said, go out and set that. So we had to have a date so we can go forward. If we keep extending it, then we'd have to keep adjusting right up until school started. That could be a nightmare. So
I will, I'm going to go on record and say that I would disagree that we were not being proactive in May, because it's more than just teachers. There's a lot of work that's been done from May through today to get us ready to hit the ground running. And, I rest my head down at night feeling very comfortable with the work that our team has done. The second thing that I will say is just last Friday, the administrators and I sat in a meeting and manually cohorted all of our students. We don't announce to the public A through K is going to come Monday and Wednesday, or even periods are going to come, Tuesday and Thursday. We felt the only way you could accurately cohort kids is to actually sit down with the numbers and schedule them and balance them up. And so we scheduled all of our multiple sibling families first, and then we left all the singletons to the individual principals to cohort. And so once we had cohorted all of our multiple siblings, then the principals went through and looked at their class rosters and then played a balancing game. And so as they firm those up today, tomorrow, Wednesday, we're hoping that by the end of this week we can announce those. I've got parents reaching out saying, when will we find out? Because we understand daycare, child arrangements are very important. That was a big impetus to making that deadline the 7th, because one of the things our principal said is the sooner the better. We have to wait too long for that. We're not going to be able to make that progress. And we understood that our families want to know that answer as well. So we think that by the end of this week, if the, all goes well, we'll have a seamless way of telling our families through final forms, go log into your final forms, check your kids' activities. That's where the cohort will be listed. And so when those are finalized, they will see Scarlet, they will see virtual, and they will see gray. And then we will be able to use the final forms to email those cohorts individually in a more efficient way than when we have our other contact systems. So the planning is something that has been ongoing. It's been daily, and it's been very active. While I know that you will disagree with that on the teacher end, I'm just going to offer that this district has not been sitting on its hands since May. There's been a lot of work, a lot of hard work by everybody on our team, and I'll stand behind their work 100%, and I'll put it up against anybody's. So, we're doing our best to get all the trains running on time without dropping any ball, and we know that even despite those efforts, we're going to fall short in some areas getting ready for the school year. But we're going to do our best to be prepared.
I know it said in there that the ESC offered help and courses in that for the summer. Do we have an account of, did any of our staff attend any of those?
I do not know what the enrollment levels were in. So that's information that is not shared with us. So I would have to actually seek that out.
Any other questions from the superintendent? Okay, we'll move on to the next item, will be public participation.
Okay, the financial side of the equation, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Panic. I want to welcome him to LaBrae. This is his first official meeting as the LaBrae treasurer. I know he gave you some financial documents, and I've asked him to be prepared to kind of just give you a summary of what you can expect from him moving forward in that financial packet. There are a few things in there that are maybe a little different than what you're accustomed to. So, Mr. Panic, I'll turn the floor over to you if you please want to give the board a review of what you've shared with them.
Yeah, so the minutes were kind of separated from the financials, and then the bills are in the actual financials. So if you look through the financials, the first page is the reconciliation sheet, similar to Carol's, and then the FinSum, and then the first page of all of the bank accounts, except for this July, I didn't have stars or the Hilltop ones yet, so that interest didn't get received until afterwards. So that way, if you look at the bottom of the FinSum, you can kind of know, and you look at the first page of the bank statements, you'll know that I'm not making the numbers up on the cash reconciliation. And then after that, after the statements, is the checks paid that month, similar to what you see from Mrs. Jones. And then the like a forecast update. So that's your general fund, 5-year forecast, monthly spending and revenue. And then your investments or your interest allocations, and then appropriation summary and revenue summary. Let's just show like, I'm just using your, Carol approved the appropriations, and those are the ones I'm using, so that's just showing you the ongoing spending versus what was budgeted. Any questions there?
Can you explain the value behind the forecast data entry that general fund accounts, and those numbers on the left align to the 5-year forecast? Same line numbers.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you know, me and AJ have talked, LaBrae has to be pretty, monitor the financials pretty closely, because of, you know, the general fund's kind of low, I guess. So that, that just, you know, shows us how much more or less we're getting in revenue than expenditures that month. And I'll get closer to the forecasted month of, you know, when I do it in November, you might have some more information of spending versus budgeted for the forecast as well.
And as far as monitoring that, one of the advantages you'll see from this as more months are added.
Yeah.
Remember, when we filed our not amended, but when we filed our budget plan with the Ohio Department of Education last January, we had to give them a list of the reports that we would use and what list of reports would be provided to the board for fiscal monitoring. And this is going to be one of those additional reports. And so from month to month, as this data is entered, you'll be able to see whether we are positive for the month, negative for the month. If we're on, and once you have a 5-year forecast, you'll then be able to see the actual revenues and expenditures to see if we are on target to meet that forecast, to come in under or over, whether it's the revenues or whether it's the expenditures. So oftentimes, for example, I might ask our treasurer, hey, are we running under budget on purchase services? And sometimes that's data you got to go glean. Well, this report is going to be able to tell us that month to month. And so we look at that line item, 3.03 on the purchase services, we'll know 3, 4, 5 months in what percentage we're running by month under that projected forecast. So a little more of a live document, if you will,
Yes.
month to month, that will give us some current trend data as we try to monitor those fiscal resources and those expenditures. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Panic on those financial reports?
I think it's just different formats, so we'll just have to
Yeah.
get used to it.
Pretty much most of the same information though.
Yeah, it's just in a different way. I can figure most of it out. So. Hope so.
If not, we will eventually.
Yeah, well, I
No,
think,
I think it's
until we can
pretty-
start getting more numbers in,
Yeah, it's the first month, so
there's not a whole lot to go
Yeah.
with.
we've got a lot of work to do on developing the forecast for November.
Good job.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Okay, also in the financial realm, we submitted our coronavirus relief funds. This was part of the governor's emergency funds that in the CARES Act in the fall, they gave schools money, but they also gave governors money for discretionary use. And so the governor, a few weeks ago, went to the Controlling Board of Ohio and gave $100 million to schools in Ohio. LaBrae's allocation was just under $60,000. It was $59,883. And then of that money, we had to submit a budget and then show how we're going to spend it. So that was submitted today, and now that it's been approved, we can, start to spend that money. We have, plans for technology, hotspots, things of that nature to help us for the remote learning periods or the blended learning model that we will be in, as well as signage and sanitation and safety supplies and things of that nature.
It's all COVID related.
It's all COVID related, yeah. There's a lot less flexibility in that 59,000 as opposed to the original CARES funding. And incidentally, since we're on that topic, I have released our community newsletter, and in the Treasury report of our community newsletter, we tried to make our community aware of the fact that in the original CARES allotment, the federal government said you could have a block of money and it could be used to keep people employed. Because remember, it was an economic stimulus bill. And so part of our stimulus money is spent on maintaining our staffing levels. And as I've shared with our union, we've identified 2 certified staff members and 1 classified member that otherwise could have been very well targeted for RIF and very well could be by the end of this year. But currently, through this fiscal year, those 3 positions are safe because of that CARES funding. So it'll allow us to deliver a level of staffing that we desire, as well as use that money without having to tax the general fund and use the federal stimulus money that is there. It also helps plug that budget hole that occurred with the budget cuts coming from the state in fiscal year 20 as well as fiscal year 21. Okay, and then as far as personnel is concerned, just a couple other things. We are lining up substitutes through the ESC, where we're trying to ensure that we have dedicated subs at LaBrae, 1 per building on call. And so we have enough supervisory duties and tasks to carry on through the year. We get enough staff absences that if we have 1 in each building, we can employ them, probably every day, keep them busy, and we'll be calling them off of the sub list. So I think we have 3 committed so far, and we're looking for 1 more. We're working on a person for the high school. Each of these people will have a home base. They can work in any building, but should they not be called in on a particular day, they will report to their home base. So someone might have the home base of LaBrae Intermediate. They could get a call the night before that says, I need you at the high school in math. So they go to the high school. But if they don't get called, they go to their home base, and then they will help out with supervisory details, temperature scannings in the morning, lunch duty, you name it. We will have plenty of work for them to do.
So those are going to be like long-term subs then?
Technically, yes, long-term subs through the ESC. Off the ESC sub list.
Okay.
Through the ESC. We're not hiring them out.
Okay. All right, cool.
Yeah, they're coming off the ESC approved list. And then, of course, tonight, one of the things that we're seeing is that there's a high competition for substitutes.
I'm sure.
And the substitute pool, what many of you might not realize, is the substitute pool is generally not a young population. Okay? So, in light of that, we all have some understanding that the pool is probably going to shrink because there's going to be some elder substitutes that are not going to want to be in schools. And then as a result of that, with a shrinking pool, the competition to pull those subs into your own district, a lot of us are raising our sub rates. And so, it's not that we necessarily want to raise it as high as I'm going to ask you to raise it tonight. I did believe that under normal circumstances, we had not raised our substitute teacher pay in probably 4 or 5 years, and we went from $78 to $81. And I was thinking this summer we would plan to get up to, maybe 85 or 86. But tonight I'm going to ask you in a resolution to approve a substitute teacher pay of $90 that'll put us in a competitive stance with the rest of the Trumbull County schools. Some are going to be at 95. There are others going to be at 90. But we're all going to be in the same boat competing for the same shrinking pool. And we want to make sure that we're well equipped to attract those individuals to LaBrae. So that's a request that we're going to ask for this evening. That's all I have on the financial and the personnel end. If you have any questions on those fronts or anything else, then we'll gladly field those questions.
Do you have anything for public participation? Anybody send any questions in?
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
I don't think have we gotten to that? Is that the next thing on the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay.
If anybody else have any other questions for Mr. Panic or AJ?
Pull the agenda up in a second.
Go into your chat and see what you got.
I'm seeing it. I'm on here.
All right. So turning our attention to the eBay chat, or the YouTube chat, we will look at first question. I had chatted out there at the beginning of our meeting to post some questions, and we do have a couple questions that are out there. And one of the first questions says, if fall sports do not go forward, what is the plan for the teams? Will they continue to train, practice throughout the normal season, or will it be a hard stop? And that comes from somebody with the handle of E.G. Smother. That is actually a great question. That is something that I'm thinking about today as we look at the status of sports, and I need to engage our principals and our athletic director in that conversation. Ideally there is value to be had to make an opportunity for kids to continue to gather and practice and hone skill. We don't, it's a little premature to suggest what might happen. Some people have suggested that if fall sports are canceled, maybe they can get rescheduled to the spring. There are some schools of thought that say we should move the non-contact sports of track and baseball and softball right now to the fall. Tell them their season starts in mid-September, give them a few weeks to get ready, and let's get the spring sports that were missed done this fall, move the fall sports to the spring, and maybe we can better manage that. The Ohio High School Athletic Association has sent out a lot of surveys over the course of the summer, and one of those surveys alluded to those types of adjustments. I think most people, meaning the people that were surveyed, ADs, superintendents, and principals, favored keeping the sports where they were, but trying to have some abbreviated season. And that's why the association shortened football. But if it gets completely canceled and we were to not have a fall sports season and there was no rescheduling, I think it's valuable to consider trying to have some level of engagement for our young people, purely from the skill development and the social emotional component of bringing kids together with their peers and their teachers, or their coaches in this case, who are teachers. Now, naturally, there's some health and safety issues, as we've seen in the news. Some local teams have had to quarantine their teams due to positive testing, so you run that risk. But I think the district would entertain that conversation, to see how we would want to look moving forward and under what condition. Does the board have any thoughts on that? They would share with the public?
I'm pretty sure that if they cancel it, they're gonna come up with a rule, whatever they wanna do, and say, you're gonna do this if you wanna continue. So, I mean, we can put our input in. I would say continue the practice, at least try to coordinate it, maybe not as intense, because you don't know how long it's gonna be. But I would like to see it continue, like you said, meeting and training as much as they can. But I imagine the state high school athletics association is probably going to give everybody some guidance saying, yeah, you may have to stop here. We're not recommending any more contact, but we'll have to adjust for that. But I'd say as far as we should go, is just let them continue to practice, maybe on a limited basis even.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else have anything on that? No? Okay, the next question comes from Rachel Kajala. She chatted in the chat field a question. It says, in the restart plan, it says that parents are required to use Pay Schools. I normally write checks so that I don't incur the fee with Pay Schools. If Pay Schools is required, will you be waiving the fees? I would say to this that that's a discussion I think we'd have to entertain as a Board of Education to see if that's something that the board would want to entertain. The fees don't get waived. The board would have to eat the fee and pay it outright. We could go back and get that data and look at what the Pay School fees were from last year. My initial response to that question for all of our parents is the idea that you can still write checks, you can send them to school with your child, they can turn them in at the office, those will still get deposited on their account. What we really don't want is we don't want the cash at the register. So if you want to send an envelope with cash to the office to get credited to the account, we'll do it. If you want to send a check to school with your child to turn in at the office and get credit to the account, we can do it. It's just at the register, we have purchased lunch cards for every student. It will resemble a plastic credit card size card. And we bought orbital scanners so that the kids do not have to use touch pins or pin pads. So the kids have no touch. Wave your card in front of the scanner. It takes it right from their Pay Schools account. So if they're a paid lunch, it deducts it from what the parents have deposited. If it's not a paid lunch and it's free or reduced, it'll deduct it accordingly. And the last thing I would say is that the fees are cheaper for those who set up an ACH transaction. So if you pay with a credit card in the Pay Schools, you typically pay the credit card fee on top of the $50 or the $100 that you might put on deposit. But if you set up an ACH transaction where it draws directly from a checking account, that fee is $1.65 regardless of the amount. So depending on how much you're putting on the account, it could be the cheaper route to go if a parent is willing to do that. But yes, great question. We will continue to take checks turned in at the office. We're just trying to minimize the handling of cash, and that's why we're really pushing the use of pay schools.
What's the option if a kid loses his card, forgets his card, or something? Is there credit at the cash register?
Well, we have the ability, our cashiers who know the kids can look them up by name. And then we can print off a paper temporary card. But we do have that. That's one of the things the cafeteria is planning for, to make sure that that system is prepared. Because you're right on, spot on. Kids are going to lose them. And then we're going to run into that issue. So thank you, Mrs. Kajala, for that question. Another question from a parent or a person viewing tonight, E.G. Smothers, says, can you give any insight as to why the Trumbull County Health Commissioner is requiring mitigations beyond what the governor is requiring? And then they put in the question 3 foot versus 6 foot and a question mark. I do not know that the governor anywhere has said 3 foot is the appropriate mitigation. I think it is a common misconception, even among school leaders, on the 3 foot requirement. Where the 3 foot requirement is coming from is the American Academy of Pediatrics. And what the health department has done in explaining where that report is coming from, that if you're considering no kids at all in school, then follow the American Pediatrics Association guidelines, require masks, and keep them at least 3 foot apart. So some schools are small enough that they can do the 6 foot distancing, which is recommended in the governor's plan, and still have, in some cases, K to 6 every day, or K to 12 every day. And then there are some schools that are not big enough that you can't get down to 10 in a class if you brought every kid every day. So we're in that ballpark of not being able to get to 10 or fewer in every class if we went every kid every day, thus the hybrid learning plan. And one of the health commissioner individuals in charge over there, one of the deputies, or was the commissioner himself, they had said to us one time in a meeting that the state has conveniently found a way to tell us what to do without telling us what to do. So when you look at the semantics of the way they've crafted the plan, they talk about, as Mr. Sewell said earlier, local decisions and local boards, but when you probe into all the details, you are met with firm, follow the guidelines to the best of your abilities. That is your number one goal. And so when you're met with that at every turn, it is going to be difficult to steer away from that and not be found negligent. And that is a concern on everybody's plate when you're, exposing your community and your district to what some would perceive as negligent because you willfully ignored what the recommendations are. So to answer that individual question, I don't know that the governor has put in his plan 3 feet. It's been explained to us by the health department that that's come primarily from the Pediatrics Association report. I have reviewed that report. I remember first seeing it there, and we tried to probe our health commissioners on why do different counties seem to have what you might conclude as different guidance, because I know that it's a point of consternation among our Trumbull County communities why certain Mahoning County schools last month were saying, we're going every day, all day. Well, a lot of those are backing out of that right now. There are several Mahoning County schools that are moving out of that plan and now going to a blended learning model because they're realizing they're not going to be able to do all day, every day. Yep, you're good. So
yeah, I think part of that, and I was one of them, that the governor, the day he put out the guidelines for opening schools or reopening schools, he had mentioned, and I think he read it, his pediatric thing about the 3 foot. So in his paper, it even stated that fact that it was recommended by that. It didn't say he recommended. So, I mean, I even took that as, because when I called you, I said, well, if we can do 3 feet, we could have everybody in class. Then you pointed out the health commissioner said, no, it would be 6. So, I mean, I kind of read it that way too. So that's kind of why, like you said, wasn't specific. It was like, yeah, this is what's recommended, but also now you got to do this. So it is kind of confusing, and that's why it's hard to follow. Why say that? If he'd have just said stay with 6 feet, there probably wouldn't have been any confusion. But to me, when I read it, it said, the governor said we can go 3 feet.
Well, I think,
It's not right.
when you look at that requirement, again, as I said earlier, one of the things they've acknowledged is classrooms look different than buses.
Yeah.
So they realize that it's easier to accomplish the social distancing in your classrooms than it is on a 70-passenger bus or so. And I don't know that you can fit 7 people on the bus. So they're being a little more firm with the distancing in the classroom space, and then it is going to put some limitations on us. And true of almost all districts. So another question at this point says, what are the plans for school-sponsored clubs and activities this year? In other words, Spanish club, drama club. That's a great question, but at this point we don't have any definitive answers on what those clubs look like. I am aware of other schools they've got students paying for trips overseas for next spring, and I find that quite surprising because I don't know how you're making families financially commit to trips that are going to be involving foreign travel. So, the American Association of School Superintendents has put out a risk responsibility chart or a risk assessment chart where they look at those things, and I can tell you that anything where there's drama gatherings and things of that nature is high on the risks chart. We're not even sure if we're going to be able to have Challenge 24 competitions when you bring kids together for the math competition at Warren Harding High School. We doubt that there will be drama productions, but our typical drama productions don't take place until the spring. I think last year was the first year, or maybe was the last year we did a winter production.
Yeah.
So now we're looking at just one in the spring. So it's too early to tell on that particular issue. We might still have some club activities, but we will adhere to the gathering requirements of 10 or fewer. If we can gather in a larger gathering, like a club meeting in the auditorium, safe spatial distancing, we'll do that. But those are all good questions that we have yet to establish answers for at this point. Another question was how much money, if any, is LaBrae spending on pandemic mitigation, masks, dividers, sanitizers, beyond what was given by the state specifically for corona-related expenses? I can answer that question. It's a great question. To go beyond what the state is giving us, first of all, the state, it's coming from the federal government through the CARES Act. And if there's another round of stimulus, there is expected to be more money for schools. I know in one of the budget talks, they were saying $70 billion for all schools across the country was the target. But you know from the news that those budget talks on a second round of stimulus fell through. So originally we received $13.5 billion for all of the United States. And of the money that LaBrae received, we are spending $60,000 on technology, as I said earlier, to help us with mobile learning for the blended learning days and buying hotspots. We've also spent several $1,000s on sneeze guards in our offices for individual instruction settings for our K-5 buildings. We bought masks for every student. We bought hand sanitizer stations for every classroom that doesn't have a sink. We processed a purchase order today for signage for the bathroom, mask signage for the doors. We've got social distancing signage that we'll have at various locations in the cafeteria, in the office, and outside bathrooms. We're buying, we spent several $1,000s on fog sprayers, the chemicals that we're going to use in those sprayers, the equipment needed to mix the chemicals, the sanitation wipes for every classroom. So, we have spent several $1,000s, all primarily out of federal relief funds. And when we have ran out of federal relief funds to spend that money, we're going to use school wellness funds. Because part of our school wellness allowance is public health, and it's primarily tied to students. So, I think there's the conventional wisdom among superintendents and treasurers is that this falls within the spending guidelines that ODE has issued relative to public health. So we are targeting some of that out of our school wellness allotment as well. We're doing our best to not have to spend any general fund money tied to that because there are other funding sources available. But to answer that question, that is kind of a synopsis without going into having the specific numbers on what has actually been spent. But, those purchase orders are public record, and if anybody wants those specific numbers, all they have to do is contact the treasurer's office, and we can provide them.
LaBrae's we're not on the Ohio checkbook, right?
We are not on the Ohio checkbook. That is correct. Okay, next question is, do you know what the remote learning days will look like exactly in the middle school? And then as a follow-up question to that, will students have access to their teachers on the remote learning days? So the remote learning days are going to be days where students will have a bank of engagement activities and lessons that they can work on. We are not always, in fact, the norm is not going to be direct engagement with the teacher. Teachers will be accessible to have possibly an email, answer an email, a Google chat, that sort of thing during a particular planning period. But under a hybrid plan, our teachers felt that they didn't really want to divide their time between the kids that are directly in front of them and the kids that are at home remote. They did acknowledge that there might be days where they could Google Meet with those groups simultaneously, but to simultaneously broadcast lessons while one group was in the classroom and the other group was at home watching that same lesson, that wouldn't be the norm. That might happen, but it wouldn't necessarily be a daily thing. And so in the surveys, one of the things that our parents had indicated was we need structure and we need some definitive guidelines on when work is to be completed. So what we've encouraged our parents to do in the remote learning or the blended learning model is to follow the regular daily schedule. So if I'm a secondary student, 6 to 12, and I've got first period reading, well then, if I'm a child and I need routine as a parent, maybe I get my kids getting started at 7:45 on the computer on his remote day doing ELA for that first 50 minutes, following his regular period schedule. And then the next day, you're back. Now, as questions arise, possibly chat that teacher or possibly send an email. And obviously, this would be during the school day. And then if the teacher has that opportunity to get back to them during their planning period or during a break in between periods, they will do their best to do that. But direct engagement is not going to happen on those remote days unless it's by design. And there were a lot of issues, and there were some legal issues surrounding live broadcasts and trying to simultaneously broadcast something in the classroom to those that are at home. And so we needed to kind of steer away from that. And we weren't in a position where we could adopt an entire new platform like a Blackboard. We had examined a Captura, which was a software program that to adopt and train, it looked a little too intensive from the screeners that said that, from the ESC, we asked their tech department to review it. So we weren't comfortable moving forward with all the changes going on, trying to adopt a completely different technology for that regard. But we did feel that we could produce, based on the bank of what we did before, or based on the conversations that our teachers had about team sharing, grade level, and content sharing among the disciplines, that we could produce remote learning lessons that engage students enough, whether it's uploading of a video, whether it's a writing assignment, and we could create those, have a bank of those lessons in there, release them via Google Classroom, which was another request that our parents had asked. They had said, can we have one common location? So via Google Classroom, we're going to be able to deliver that, and then that's the medium, the platform, and then when students come back the next day, they'll be able to further engage those teachers with that. So if we are on a complete remote learning platform, then we provided what those period schedules would look like. Because if we're 100% remote, we're not going to be expected to have 90-minute blocks in ELA or 90-minute blocks of math. So our ELA teachers and math teachers, our elementary teachers, came up with a schedule that if we are 100% remote, here's what your day looks like. At 9 o'clock, you're doing X. At 9:50, we're on to the next period where we're doing a different design. And that was shared under the remote learning part of that plan. But if it's a remote day at home while my other cohort is in the building and parents are looking for guidance, they are to follow the regular bell schedule to help a child keep pace and focus, and then the activities will be loaded into Google Classroom that will engage students, and teachers can be reached via email, chat, those types of platforms. Another question said, we don't know if we have another question or not. Maybe it was just a comment about clarity.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, so that was the last question. And as always, if you have any further questions, we encourage parents, community members to reach out to myself via email or the principals. We've spent a lot of time answering some emails over the last, like I said, 10 days or so, trying to make sure that, we're giving parents the feedback or answers to the questions that they're after. So at this point, I guess that'll be the end for the public participation, seeing that there are no other questions in the chat.
All right, then we'll move on to the regular board and the agenda, those resolutions. Mr. Calderon.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, or the first item on the agenda, is a recommendation that the board approve the minutes from our last regular meeting of July 13th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Morton, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
and Mr. Sewell.
Motion, yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the board approve the July financial report as presented by the treasurer.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Morton. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education approve the payment of July bills as presented by the treasurer.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mr. Morton. Any discussion?
Maybe in the future that won't be there because you're approving that in the actual financial report. If that's okay with everyone?
Yeah, if you want to put it in there.
That's fine.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Ms. Ansel,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education approve the following change orders from Murphy Contracting for the Bascom remodeling project. We had 3 change orders, and change order number 3, we had a deduction of $433 because we changed the type of base that is going to be installed. They had an interlocking 6-inch rubber base in the architectural drawings. We felt that we could get away with a 4-inch cove base. That 4-inch cove base is what you see. It's pretty standard in construction in public buildings. It coves out and then covers up any seams along the wall. An interlocking base is more interlocking going below the flooring and interlocking with it. A little more pricey, not necessary. We felt we could nickel and dime it and save a few more bucks, so we made that change. We needed to also redo some electric, but we had to, something that was absent in the plans was a junction box where we're going to, excuse me, I'm on the wrong one. We had a lockable door in the clinic that we wanted to add to the storage cabinet. So we have 2 6-foot cabinets in the clinic, and they were going to be open-faced. And so I reached out to Mrs. Harper and said, hey, we're looking at this, and upon further study, we think that maybe this is not a good design. And she said, absolutely, can we put doors on them? And they said, we caught it in time, no charge. So we put 2 lockable doors on those cabinets. They're already installed, and it's not going to cost us any additional money. And then last but not least, we had some edits to the rough ends for door controls and tamper-resistant receptacles. One was our decision. The other decision for tamper-resistant receptacles was a building code decision coming from the Trumbull County Building Department. So the architect satisfied them with a building code explanation and an adjustment, and then we're going to complete those rough ends and the finished electricity, but that'll cost us another $165. In the change order I gave you, you can see the actual cost and what that totals. So we're actually a few $100s below where we were the last time we did a change order. All told, at this point, we're just under $150,000 in the cost of the project. We'll end up being a little bit over that by the time we install our blinds, and we've separately contracted with Ashton Sound to do some final wiring on the door lock system, but all within a reasonable budget figure compared to that original 150.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
and Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation to the Board of Education approve the fiscal year 2020 excess cost reconciliation payment to the Trumbull County ESC in the amount of $66,527.25.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Duncan.
Okay, last year this came in at about $86,000, and so just like you reconcile your checking account, we go into the current fiscal year with a contract amount. Once the fiscal year is over with and we see where all of our costs with the ESC fall, then we reconcile the following fiscal year. So this is based off of last year, the number of special education students enrolled in MD, ED, aid costs, you name it. And then some years we are getting a check back. The last several years, our special ed population has required us to spend more money than we're traditionally accustomed to. So we'll end up, once we verify the data here over the next few weeks, you've authorized payment if indeed it checks out. If there needs to be a revision, we'll get the ESC to make that revision amount. Typically, the revisions are in our favor and they subtract a few bucks.
Even with the shutdown, we didn't cover everything with what we'd already paid.
Ohio law requires you to pay people under contract, and so those teachers still delivered special education services to those students, and so by law, they were paid, and by law, those kids were given their IEP services, and we are still responsible for paying it according to that contract. Now, the services look much different than what we are accustomed to, and I'm sure what those families were accustomed to, but we're still responsible for paying.
And they administer them just in a different way.
The only way we saved money on that was the busing, because that's a different kind of contract. So we saved money on the special ed busing because those students weren't transported every day. They weren't even transported at all. Everything was done on the Google Meet and Zoom sessions. This year will look a little different because most of our special ed population who are in ESC units will be serviced 4 days out of 5, physically in attendance, because their classrooms are small.
All right, need a motion?
We got this one.
Do?
Yes, that's the
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation to the Board of Education approve entry into a class action claim through engaging with the law firms of Brennan, Mana, and Diamond, and Ennis and Britton to file a proof of claim on behalf of the district in the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy in the United States Bankruptcy Court, Southern District of New York, in regards to Purdue Pharma LP et al., Chapter 11, case number 19-23649, in accordance with the terms of the engagement letter provided to the district.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion?
Okay, so, there's an opportunity because of the OxyContin overprescription conundrum that we have seen in our state, which many believe led to the opioid addiction rates of Trumbull County and Mahoning County and Southwest Ohio, which have been parts of the state hardest hit by opioids and addiction. And so as a result of that, you'll see some lawsuits that have been brought forth against these companies. So apparently, when I first got wind of this, I kind of told the attorney, I don't know if we have the time. I don't know that we can get involved in this. I didn't know we have a claim. He texted me and said, we just need to give me 30 seconds and I'll explain what's going on. He said, this has really already been decided. There's already a figure, there's a per capita figure already determined. It's a formality. You can join while there's time, and basically he said you'll get an opportunity to be part of the claim, whether you've had a case or not. If you're part of the claim, you can still get a dollar denomination back to the district. Could not say how much it would be. Could be $100, could be $2,000.
I think it's supposed to be a pretty substantial amount, but that, I don't, wouldn't hold your breath.
Right, don't hold your breath. So when he gave me some more information, I went and looked up the per capita amount for Trumbull County,
Oh, yeah.
and it's like $5.10 per person.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that means $5.10 per kid, because that might put you around $5,000. But that at least puts it in perspective for you, if indeed it's even calculated that way. But his point was this costs you nothing. All you have to do is tell me you want to be involved in the claim. And so we hire legal counsel every year with our approved list, and one of those people is telling me to do it. It's like, okay, well, if there's nothing you can get, nothing to lose at all. So
Won't be any additional legal fees?
no legal fees.
No.
Because all the legal fees are taken off the top. What's left over is what goes to the claimants in the claim. So in our attorney's guidance, this figure's already predetermined. There's nothing for you to do. There's nothing for the board to pay. All you have to do is say, yes, do you want in? And as the attorney said to him, it's a no-brainer. So since it didn't involve work, the only obligation was to email them back and say, yes, we want to be a part of the claim. Then they email us a resolution to pass, and then we have the treasurer sign off that the board approved this resolution, and that formalizes our participation. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Okay. Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Ms. Ansel,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the LaBrae Board of Education approve the memorandum of understanding with the LaBrae Teachers Association regarding the implementation of OTES effective September 29th, 2020.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansel, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion?
This is all about the evaluations, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, have we ever considered, because I thought that years ago, getting evaluated by outside observers to come in, who would be non-partial outside observers to come in, free up the principals to do their regular job instead of trying to find time to figure out when they can, because we didn't get them done last year. Don't know that we'll be able to get them done this year or whenever. But, is there a pool to choose from that we can hire outside people to come in?
You can, go ahead,
Okay.
let's be good, speak.
We kind of tried that many years ago, and it didn't work very well.
Why?
Because the people that were evaluating didn't understand exactly what elements were involved in the lesson they were evaluating. So it just didn't work. But I mean, I see where you're going, but, I don't know.
I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, it's in the principal's job descriptions though, isn't it?
Well, I think I would say that the principal's job today is very different than it's ever been in the past, because evaluation responsibilities are heightened. And a lot of that has to do with the way we've changed the evaluation. Quite honestly, there's some of us that have been involved in education long enough to know that evaluations weren't very substantial in prior years. And that's the case for many districts. Well, Ohio changed that with the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System, where they developed a teaching rubric and they said, you're going to evaluate teachers to this rubric. And, if you're doing it with fidelity, it's a very, high standard of instruction that should be met. Far different than some of the things that I've been evaluated on as a teacher or that I've used, as a principal. I mean, in fact, when I was a principal, we were using Charlotte Danielson's model of 4 domains for evaluation. And I felt that was one of the best evaluation tools I've ever seen. I know I never had anything like that as a teacher. And so when you look at the OTES model, there really is no choice in what you can use in the state of Ohio. Now, decisions were made early on when we adopted OTES about who was to do the evaluations. And, you know, our teachers, I don't believe, want someone from the outside evaluating them. They want their principals evaluating them. You might find that surprising, but
No, I don't find it surprising. I just think that's not a great idea. You know, you could have bias in there. You bring an outside person in, and there's
Sure.
no bias. They don't know that person.
sure. And so one of the things that I think our principals would argue was, how's an outside person know the culture of a classroom? They're not going to be in there for 30 minutes and know how a teacher might have handled a particular kid. And to an outsider, it might look bad, but they have no contextual history on that student or that teacher, and they might not know the culture of the interaction, where what might look necessarily as not a great thing to an outsider might actually be a point of refine or reinforcement for a teacher, where you're letting that teacher know how well they handled that particular situation, or the school culture, or not the school, but the classroom culture of a particular teacher. And then naturally, I'll be honest, I don't think our principals should abdicate their instructional responsibility. I think far too often in education, we've allowed principals not to be instructional leaders. Well, you know, we're too small of a district to have a curriculum director. So we don't have the people that aren't principals that can go in the classrooms. So somebody's got to be the instructional leader that helps teachers engage in discussions about teaching and learning. And that's what OTES is designed to do. It's to engage teachers in looking at a teaching rubric of standards, and then it's a coaching model. It's not meant to be an I got you model, because teachers are allowed to produce evidence beyond what an observer might see in that 30-minute session. I think most of our principals would say that it's not the evaluation that bothers them, it's the frequency with which Ohio requires these evaluations. And Ohio heard Ohio principals because over the last few iterations of revision, they've lightened that by saying you can, you know, evaluate accomplished teachers every 3 years, and you can evaluate skilled teachers every 2 years. And we are even making adjustments in our own policy, which we're going to ask you to approve tonight, that says when you're evaluating an accomplished teacher, you don't have to do a 30-minute formal observation. You can do informal observations, which can be kind of a touch-base 15-minute walk-through observation with a follow-up conference, much less burdensome. So, you know, we've had those options where we could choose outside people, but when we consulted with our teachers the first time we ever crafted this policy, the sense was they really wanted their own building principals evaluating them. Those are the people that they've built relationships with, and those are people that they are comfortable with. Now, to your point, Mr. Morton, about bias, that was part of the conversation in this round of consultation with union leadership. And one of the things that I had told the union is that as something we could put in our policy that is always a normal practice, and it's always within the teacher's rights, is that when you want to counter something in your evaluation that a building principal said or did or assessed you on, you have the right to attach a written statement as a rebuttal. Nowhere was that ever written, but we've always practiced it. So we actually put that piece into our policy, so now that it is expected, it's codified, if you will, it gives teachers another layer of insurance, because the concern is, well, if that principal's biased against me, it could look bad. So we wanted to put at least to some degree, verbiage in there that gave them peace of mind that they had a procedural right to add something that goes into their personnel file. And then the other side of the equation, as I tried to explain to our teachers, is if you're going to use a evaluation to try to non-renew a teacher, that's not going to just happen easily. You're going to try to non-renew a teacher, and you're going to have a fight on your hands. And that fight on your hands is going to guarantee some just due process procedural rights. And so while something might not be mentioned in the policy to protect teachers, I try to encourage our teachers to please know that if we ever try to non-renew, that there's law that's in place that no one's changed, that's going to be in that teacher's behalf, that they're going to go back and use regardless of what our policy says, because our policy is kind of already compliant with the law. So in a nutshell, that describes how we got to there, how that has been part of a brief conversation about who does the evaluating. and the choice was the comfort level being more with their own building principals.
I'm thinking a bias could work both ways, though, too, in favor of a person, and you know, if there is that bias, then you're not getting a true evaluation of the teacher's teaching as well.
Well, that's where you have, when you hire your administrator, you expect that professional, you know,
Yes, we can
Duty.
expect it, but that doesn't mean we're always going to get it.
but if we don't get it, we should get rid of it.
I
That's
agree.
our job.
I agree.
We get rid of the administrators if they're not doing their job. Teachers have their own contract, which they have to abide by, which we can enforce. If we feel somebody's not doing their job, that's our job to remove them. They're expected to do that job, and that's the way they plan it.
I don't, I don't have any historical context here, but, I think, the evaluation system is, it is not, over the last 7 or 8 years, as we've moved into this model, it has not been without a painstaking process and ruffling a lot of feathers in our teachers. I know that it's caused a level of discomfort on both sides. The administrative side, in terms of getting used to a rigorous evaluation system, as well as teachers. And I'll go on record and say this, I think we're doing a far better job than we've done in a long time evaluating teachers. Because I know there are buildings in our district that when I walked in the door, teachers hadn't been evaluated in a long time. And that was one of the reasons that our teachers were uncomfortable with the new evaluative model, because in some cases, some teachers hadn't been evaluated in more than 3 years. And I can cite some teachers that hadn't been evaluated in longer than that. So I think while we always have room to be better evaluators, make no mistake, we are evaluating consistently with a quality level of accountability. And yes, we have room to improve as administrators to do evaluations, but I think we are far better today than where we were when we didn't have OTES.
Any other questions or comments? Motion on that, right?
Yeah. I'll call the roll.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
and Mr. Stoll.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation of Board of Education approve the revised 2020-21 academic school calendar. And that school calendar had 2 significant changes. It pushes the start of school back to the 31st, and then it also will make November 3rd a student day of attendance. It was previously scheduled to be a professional development day countywide. The ESC has canceled that, and now we can make that student day of attendance.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
and Mr. Stoll.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education approve the Scarlet and Gray attendance calendar for the 2020-2021 school year applicable when LaBrae is actively engaged in the blending learning model of attendance due to COVID-19.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Gibson. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
and Mr. Stoll.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education approve the 2020-21 remote learning plan for LaBrae.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Duncan, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Stoll.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the LaBrae Board of Education employ John DiOrio as custodian on a 1-year limited contract subsequent to the completion of required and successful background checks effective August 10th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion?
Any particular thing that elevated this gentleman above all the other applicants?
I can speak to that maybe. I helped interview him. His experience and his demeanor interacting with the supervisor of buildings and grounds, and his willingness to be flexible, and all those things were on the top level. Many of those were with the other applicants also, but we felt overwhelmingly that he was the best person for the job.
And you realize that it's emptying trash cans, cleaning toilets, dusting and mopping.
Yes.
Because I see he was in charge of software in support of the Western Hemisphere for Ridgestone. It's a little bit of a come down for doing that. I did notice some of the other applicants had carpentry skills, electrical wiring skills, plumbing skills, concrete masonry.
If I can interject on that front, five applicants, 2 of them failed to return any phone calls to schedule an appointment with Mr. Cemento. So they did, 2 of those individuals who had those skills that you're citing did not return phone calls when he made attempts to get them scheduled for the interview.
So they didn't have interviews.
They did not get interviewed.
So how many did we interview?
We ended up interviewing 3. And the way Mr. Cemento described the other one candidate, who I think might have had some of those skills that you referred to, is that he kind of felt that that individual was looking to climb because his questions focused on opportunities for promotion. So he didn't know that that would be the appropriate fit. So that was the extent of what he shared with me.
Opportunity to climb to what?
Within LaBrae, wondering what opportunities there were to be promoted and what other opportunities existed to climb to a better position within the district. That's what he inquired about. So that was the information that he shared.
Any other questions? Treasurer, please call roll.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
and Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education approve the school resource officer agreement with the Warren Township Board of Trustees and the Warren Township Police Chief effective fiscal year 2021 through fiscal year 2022.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Duncan, second by Mr. Morton. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the Board of Education approve the memorandum of understanding with the Cadence Care Network, which formerly was known as Home for Kids, to provide school social work services for the 2020-21 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Gibson. Any discussion?
A part of their services is pays for Mr. Meredith to be here. He's here every day of the week. What services he can't provide to those who are here physically, he will be following up with teleconferencing, much like he did in the spring. And then, of course, part of this is funded through a grant, and we pay for our share through our school wellness funds, and that's about $24,000 for the year. So we're pleased to be in a position to be able to bring these services back, and we're hopefully going to have a more productive year, if possible, based on the attendance calendar.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the Board of Education approve the payment in lieu of transportation for the students identified herein in proportion to days of in-person attendance as reported to LaBrae by the educating entity identified herein. And so we see 2 students, James Hicks and Genevieve Hicks, who will be attending St. Rose Catholic School. And St. Rose will report back to us, much like they did last year, the number of days they attend, and then we will, based on today's authorization, next summer, Treasurer will cut them a check based on the days of attendance.
And the max is $250, right?
Well, that's the minimum, that's what we pay. Max is actually higher than that. We used to pay the max on certain times.
We're paying them to the family, right?
We're paying them to the family, yes.
Cost of one thing, okay.
But that's a ballpark figure, you're right in that area, about 250.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Duncan, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the Board of Education approve the substitute teacher per diem rate of $90 for the 2020-21 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Abstain because of a conflict.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the Board of Education approve the employment of the following certificated individuals as substitute teachers as needed according to the board approved substitute teacher rate effective August 21st, 2020. And that would be Charlene Brandt and Janice Gibson.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion?
As customary, when we have teachers retire, if they're interested in subbing, they prefer not to go through the county list because they don't want to be exposed to other districts. So we hire back our own. We're doing the same thing here. These two individuals are properly licensed. We know them well. And with your vote, they'll be eligible to serve. There will be plenty of days they won't because they do enjoy the retirement.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Abstain.
Mr. Morton,
No.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 3 yeses, 1 abstention, 1 no.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the Board of Education approve Carly Jones as the VLC monitor on an as-needed basis at the substitute per diem rate for the 2020-21 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
No.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 no.
Okay, next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education approve the following individuals as classified substitutes for the 2020-21 school year subsequent to the completion of the required and successful background checks. And you can see the categories there and the current rates of pay per hour.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
No.
Mr. Gibson,
Abstain because of conflict.
and Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 3 yeses, 1 abstention, 1 no.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education hire Courtney Kish as the varsity volleyball head coach for the 2020-21 school year. And then, of course, she's got to complete all the revised code requirements for pupil activity permits and background checks. But we also want to add to that resolution that this is conditioned upon the continuation of sports as determined by orders issued by the Ohio High School Athletic Association, the director of the Ohio Department of Health, or the governor of the state of Ohio, and to be paid pro rata or on a pro rata basis in accord with any issuance of said order.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion?
You'll give me that in a minute, right?
I will get you that text, yes.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
I'm sorry, you seconded?
Mrs. Ansell, sorry.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
and Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education hire John Armini as our head football coach for the 2020-21 school year. Of course, this shall become effective upon all the satisfactory completion of background checks and proper fulfillment of other applicable requirements for the pupil activity permit, and conditioned upon the continuation of sports as determined by orders issued by the state of Ohio or the governor of the state of Ohio, the Ohio High School Athletic Association, or the director of the Ohio Department of Health, and to be paid pro rata in accord with any issuance of said order.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion?
Was this added in here? 'Cause I just-
Yeah,
Yes.
that's an add. That's the one he was talking about before.
It's added in there because Mr. Rowe gave me his recommendations and he failed to add the head football coach, and we had not hired any fall coaches yet.
Okay, so it's just not on my screen.
It's just
Yeah,
not
it's
on your
not.
screen, and because I think Mr. Rhodes just absentmindedly, maybe he was thinking we had already hired our head coach when we hadn't, so I'm adding him on.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
and Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries. 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education hire Gregory Schuster as our varsity cross-country head coach for the 2020-21 school year. And as is with the other cases of our head coaches, they have to comply with all the requirements of revised code for background checks and pupil activity permits. And he too will be subject and conditioned upon the continuation of sports as determined by the Ohio High School Athletic Association, the director of the Ohio Department of Health, or any order issued by the governor of the state of Ohio, and to be paid on a pro rata basis in accord with any issuance of said order.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion?
I don't think I have the newest one either. So, give me 1 second to get back on track.
No problem.
That was Ansel and Duncan?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
It was number T on the original list.
Yeah, I'm on T, but I
Oh.
overrode it. So who-
Okay,
Who'd you hire before this one?
that was Armini, the football coach.
Okay. Okay. Duncan or Ansel and Duncan. I
Yes.
got it.
All right, treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that was Greg Schuster.
Yeah.
Okay. So then Kish, Armini, Schuster,
Q.
and well, yeah, we're gonna slide another one in here.
Another
one.
All right, here comes another one. We're gonna have 2 more, and then we'll get to Mr. Pugh after that. So the next recommendation is that the board will hire Diane Downey as the head soccer coach for the girls program. And of course, all the conditions apply for the pupil activity permit. And then based on the continuation of any sports per the order of the association, the director of health, the governor of the state of Ohio, and will be paid upon any prorated portion if there is an order.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Gibson. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
The next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the LaBrae Board of Education hire John Pugh as the varsity golf coach for the 2020-21 school year under all of those conditions as applied, as well as the continuation based on any order by the state that would discontinue sports, and should that happen, be paid on a pro rata basis in accord with the issuance of an order.
So
So-
moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Gibson. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education hire Isaiah Carmichael as the boys soccer head coach. And of course, all those conditions that we've stated previously apply, as well as any issuance of an order that would discontinue sports then the contract would be paid on a prorated basis based on said order.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mrs. Duncan, second by Mrs. Ansel. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Seal,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Okay. Bear with me 1 second. I gotta pull up 2 docs.
Should be on B.
So we're going to pass, I'm going to skip the verbiage, but now we're going to move on to our assistant coaches. And the recommendation, now previously you were given all the assistants in our non-contact sports. We're going to revise that resolution and we're going to hire all of our athletic assistants at once. So it's going to be non-contact sports and our contact sports. And the resolution will read the same as the head coaches and the fact that it's based on the continuation of sports in comparison to any order that's issued by the association, the director of health, or the governor of the state of Ohio. And should said order be issued that discontinues those sports, they'll be paid on a pro rata basis. So for our non-contact sports, you see listed before you there, Rick Aldridge is assistant volleyball, Mandy Rowe is the 8th grade volleyball coach, Angelica Pugh is the 7th grade volleyball coach, Veronica Whitfield as the assistant cross country coach. And then for the contact sports, we have Rick Bradich, Colin Dotson, Joe McConnell as varsity football assistants, Larry Hoffman, Tony Stevens, and Marcus McConnell. Larry Hoffman is a 9th grade / JV coach, and then Tony Stevens and Marcus McConnell splitting a half contract each for the other 9th grade position. And then for the junior high, Chris Drake, Chris Simmers, and Dave Zelenak. And then for cheerleading, we will hire Christy Arment and Alexis Nogales, and all of these individuals will be hired based on the idea of the premise that we spelled out in those previous resolutions. So asking the board to approve all of those athletic positions under those conditions.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mrs. Duncan, second by Mrs. Ansel. Any discussion?
So why do we make such a change? Again, called legal counsel, going back to the question of hesitant to hire anybody, really don't think that that financially is a prudent thing to do until we have clarity, but I am concerned about going much further without liability. And so when you start examining liability and responsibility, the board needs to have approved coaches. And so working through that issue today, the attorney said, use this kind of language, and then I'll give you language that your secretary can put into their contracts that reads much of the same way. And if they refuse to sign it, they refuse to sign it. They don't have a contract. So we think we're protected in the event that we try to do right by them because they've been working all summer. And in many cases, the official seasons have started on August 1st. And we need to be ensuring that we're covered from a legal standpoint. So that's why that was changed.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
and Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
And next item on the agenda is the recommendation, find my spot here, that the board approve the complimentary passes resolution. This is a formality every year because of ethics laws. We have to pass, this resolution that permits us to give athletic passes to board members, faculty, and staff. So we're asking you to pass that resolution so that we can give those complimentary passes and not be in violation of ethics for the 2020-21 school year. However, we don't know if we're going to be able to use them.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mrs. Duncan, second by Mrs. Ansel. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 abstention.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education employ the following non-certificated person as a Title I tutor not to exceed 5.5 hours per day at a rate of $9.40 an hour for the 2020-2021 school year, with work days to be determined by the availability of federal funding.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Gibson. Any discussion?
And that individual is Tiffany Bailey, and she'd be assigned at Bascom Elementary, and Tiffany's been with us for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years or more.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
and Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the Board of Education employ the following certificated persons as Title I tutors not to exceed 5.5 hours a day at a rate of $13.75 per hour for the 2020-21 year, with workdays to be determined by the availability of federal funding.
So moved.
And they are Angela Rogers and Marilyn Street.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mrs. Duncan. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
No.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 no.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the board employ the following certificated person not to exceed 5.5 hours a day at a rate of $13.75 per hour for the coming school year, with workdays to be determined by the availability of ESSER funds. That's the CARES funding, and last year we paid for this individual out of our general fund, and this year we're able to bring them back under the federal funding that's been provided in the spring. That individual is Brooke Ferry. She will be stationed at Bascom Elementary.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion?
Just remember, this used to be paid for out of title money. But over the last few years, our title fund's been cut, and then we went to the general fund. Now we're fortunate enough to be able to find another funding source, at least for this year.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is that the LaBrae Board of Education has recommended to approve the rate of $20 per hour for certified personnel involved with special ed testing meetings beyond the established school day that go beyond the 2020-21 school year.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion?
We do this every year. It's a formality. It's a way of ensuring that if they have to come in on a particular day, because it couldn't be scheduled on another day to test, they're compensated.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the board approve the rate of $50 for certified personnel involved in a special ed IEP meeting development or developmental meeting that would work on creating the IEPs beyond the established school day, beyond the 2020-21 school year.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Gibson. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education approve $20 per hour wage for home instruction and tutors for the 2020-21 school year.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mrs. Duncan, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education authorize the superintendent to execute a shared services agreement for web hosting services with Lordstown Local Schools for the coming school year.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Gibson. Any discussion?
Reached out to the new Lordstown superintendent, asked them if this is what they wanted to do, encouraged him it might be a good decision, being that it would buy him time to evaluate what they want to do with regards to web hosting. He got hired late. You know, this is really a minor agreement. Sometimes it costs them a couple $100. Sometimes, I think last year it cost them $78. So whatever time our tech coordinator dedicates to updating the web server, updating the software used to create the websites, that's the time that he bills for it. And we share that 50-50. So with this, we would agree to share those costs 50-50, as opposed to us paying for them alone.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansell,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the board approve the employment of Anthony J. Colorado as a lead mentor at 2.25% of the base salary of the certificated salary schedule. And that's in a negotiated agreement between the board and the Teachers Association for that role.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Ansell, second by Mr. Gibson. Any discussion?
Being that each year when we advertise this position, no teachers apply for it, we still need to have a lead mentor. So by default, I'll end up taking it with your approval.
Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Abstain.
Mr. Sole.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the Board of Education approve.
4-0, one abstention.
I'm sorry,
4 yeses.
Yeah.
4 yes, 1 abstention.
my apologies.
Ah,
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation the Board of Education approve a first reading of the following board policy edition, and it's policy 8420.01. It's on pandemics and other medical emergencies. This was a special edition policy that Neola's recently rolled out, and I know I spoke with our policy advisor or consultant, wordsmithed it a little bit. There really isn't much to it that you can see there, and so we're asking you to pass it for the first reading, and then we'll come back next month and do a second reading on it as well.
So moved.
Second.
motion by Mrs. Duncan, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion? Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Sole.
Yes, motion carries 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is a recommendation that the Board of Education approve the first reading and subsequent adoption of the following board policy revision, and that is policy number 3220, and that's the standards-based teacher evaluation for our professional staff.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Ansell. Any discussion?
So by law, we are required to consult with teachers, but this is still the board policy. And so in consultation with those, with our teachers, we have a teacher evaluation committee. I reached out to the union leadership in June and said, here's a copy of the revised policy. Let me know if you want to have our full-blown committee come together, or if you think this is something we can do just among the leadership. They chose to do that just among the leadership. And so we've had some discussions via email and Zoom meetings over this. And there was a time where we thought, I think Neola had inadvertently informed us that we didn't have to pass this until next year. And then they got a hold of us in late July and said, uh-oh, mistake, you got to have it passed by September 1st, according to Ohio law. We were wrong in that communication. So I emailed out the final copy to the union, said, let's take one more look at it. We had some additional conversation about it, in terms of the issues that they had. And so we're bringing to you this policy, and we're going to waive the second reading and adopt it so we can comply with Ohio law to have it board approved by September 1st.
Mr. Gibson,
Yes.
Mrs. Ansel,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
No.
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Sole.
Yes, motion carries 4 yeses, 1 no. Miscellaneous. Anybody have anything? All right, we'll go to concerns of the board. Mrs. Ansell, you have anything?
I don't really have anything. Welcome, Brad.
Oh, thank you.
And I think everybody's doing their best to try and get school started on time. I appreciate that as a parent.
Mrs. Duncan?
And I agree with Karen. It's a tough job, and there's so much to do, and we still don't know how this is going to turn out. Just give it our best shot. So, thank you, everybody. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Mr. Morton?
I have two things. The one is we received that notice from the Freedom from Religion Foundation
Yes.
to not have a prayer said before our meeting, not during our meeting. And again, according to what was shared with me, May 5th of 2014, the U.S. Supreme Court says that we can, as long as we are not coercing people into doing that. And I would like to continue doing it before our board meeting, regardless of what this Freedom from Religion Foundation says that we can and can't do. If it's good enough for the Supreme Court, it's good enough for me. And the second thing is, want to welcome Brad.
Thank you.
It's probably no secret I did not vote for you to come in here. Nothing personal or anything. I think you're a good guy and everything that. I just feel that you were pretty much handpicked, but you did not apply originally for the position. And just wanted to make sure that we have an understanding, at least that's my understanding, that you work with the superintendent, but you work for the Board of Education. So I'm sure you'll do a fine job.
Thank
Thank you. Mr. Gibson.
Welcome, Brad.
Thank you.
You did a good job. Threw a lot of curveballs at you on the first night here. As far as-
No,
You handle it very gracefully, and that shows a lot of class and a lot of professionalism. Appreciate that. And the professionalism and all the administration stuff, to crafting all these different policies that we have, and the ones that we're going to have in the future. Thanks to them. A big thank you to everybody there.
I just have a couple of things, any of the parents, anytime you guys want to reach out to any of us, our emails are listed on the webpage, so you can email us anytime if you have a concern. For some reason you don't want to go to administrator, that's fine, that's what we're here for. I know it's a little harder to see us in public now, but we're still available, so it's there. I know you're going to hear a lot of differences, like I said, between counties because of the different rules and regulations from Mahoning to here. And, even when we start school, the complex may have some different requirements than Bascom. A lot of it's going to depend on count. Remember, Bascom's a little older, sometimes their rooms are a little bigger. If the kids, if we have enough count, we may be able to get more kids in that than we have here. This complex was designed by the state by our enrollment at that time, so, I think the maximum we get is maybe 12 desks in almost all of the rooms. So we're going to try to make the adjustment we can. I just, ask the parents to, stay with us. I mean, it's a difficult time for all of us. There's going to be a lot of adjustments. There's going to be a lot of changes. Our main goal is to keep everybody safe. The students, the parents, grandparents, anybody they're exposed to, the staff. We have a whole community to look for. Our goal as a school board is look out for the kids first. But, we have a whole community we're responsible for too. It's not easy, and I want to thank the administrative staff for all that, the logistics planning, scheduling. That's a nightmare, and it's ongoing change. This is going to be fluid. Tomorrow if the governor comes out and said we're a red county, everything could change. So it's going to have to be, at least we have plans A, B, and C. Hopefully we can adjust to it. I'd like to see us all go to green where we can go 100%. I don't see that right now, but I think as a board, we're all on the same page. We want to have everybody here. We know it's best for the kids, but we can't do it and do it safely right now. So we'll do what we have to. And Brad, welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate you trying to get everything gathered. I know I met with you and Carol when Carol was trying to pass everything on to you. I know it's a big task, but we appreciate it. Yeah, we miss Carol, but it's time she moved on. I guess we have to also. We do appreciate everything she did for us. Had a nice article in the paper about her, and that was,
Yes.
it was very well. She was very deserving. We do have one more item. We need to go into executive session to discuss negotiations. Just so everybody knows, there will be no vote taken in the executive session, and we will not be voting on anything when we come out. It's just for discussion only. So I'd like a motion to go into executive to discuss negotiations.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Mr. Gibson, second by Mrs. Duncan. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries 5-0. We're going to take about 5 minutes, and we're going to executive session. Appreciate everybody attending on YouTube. We will not be broadcasting.
Okay, at this point, this concludes the live portion of the Board of Education meeting for the LaBrae Local School District on Monday, August 10th, 2020.
Anybody has to go to the bathroom? Yeah.
How's it?